Hey, what's up my friends? It's Carpo here. I couldn't figure out how else to start this video, so I thought I would just go ahead and make it. And it's been a couple days and I had a couple subjects I wanted to talk about, but as you can see I've got a black eye, so first off people are going to wonder about that. I was hunting for a four-leaf clover and I got attacked by 3 leprechauns, and one of the guys kicked me right in the eye. Truth is, I got in a fight with a rake. It was something right out of a comic book. I was just out on the back porch, and I turned around and stepped forward and stepped on a rake leaning against a wall, and that rake just went BAM! And, I mean, this was 3 days ago. Knocked me silly. And so I kind of got my butt kicked by a rake. So that answers that question. Now, as to this video, and the subject matter of this video, first off, I was going to do this as an audio recording, and I decided I would rather do it on video because, as strange as it sounds, it's hard for me to do an audio recording. It's not the same as looking at the camera. It's I have to be sitting there focused in and speaking into it. Now I have an audio recorder going here for my Patreon channel. So if anybody wants to download this or, you know, listen to it later, on the go, whatever it might be, it's on there. But for the most part, I like talking to the camera when I'm talking about important subjects because I feel like it gives me a closer connection with the people and gives them the idea that I'm serious about what I'm talking about. And I hate this subject. I didn't even want to talk about it. And for 2 days I've been thinking about this, taking notes, learning things, and decided it was time to make a video about immigration and fears of immigrants and where our future is headed as a country. Before I do that, I want all of you to know, if you don't already know me, I'm fairly balanced-minded. I am not a liberal, I'm not a social justice warrior, I'm not a conservative, and I'm definitely not a fool. I don't believe what the media tells me, I don't watch the news, but I do keep up on what's going on in current events. I'm basically do my best to assess things from a neutral standpoint. That's very difficult, because I'm human, and all humans are biased. So getting that out of the way, let's talk about immigration for a minute. I've had so many conversations about this with people that it was almost something that I just had to talk about. Like, to give you an example, the other day I had a conversation with someone and abortion came up. And in the conversation, we got to why they didn't believe that, why they were pro-life, which I understand. I'm all for saving babies. But I was explaining how pro-choice really means that you either A, you want the person to have the choice, or B, you want the government to interfere in your life. And in the conversation, they said, the problem is that not enough white women are having babies anymore, and that basically, in a nutshell, whites are going extinct. I thought about that for a while. I thought long and hard on that. I thought, well, why is that such a big deal? Why are people so attached to their color and their culture? But it's more than that. You know, it's something that I also can understand, people's fears. And if a person is concerned about something, regardless of what you may think about them, you have to listen to this person to understand where they're coming from, or else you're just as ignorant as anyone else. So, I wanted to understand how people can be so afraid that whites are really in decline. So I did some research. As I said before, this is neutral, and in the end I'll make my conclusions. So if you want to, you know, spew hate, leave a nasty comment, vote it down, whatever you may do, that's fine. It's your choice. But hear me out at least, because I want to understand reasoning for people's thinking. And all of this research is through a variety of different channels, and I'm not guaranteeing all of it's accurate. So, from what I understand, they believe that whites in this country will be a minority by the year 2045. Now, that scares the shit out of a lot of people, thinking that America is a white country. In 1940, we were 88.3% white in this country. And today, that is quickly dropping. And there are multiple reasons for this. It's not just because of all the immigration. although immigrants have a lot more children than whites overall and by ratio. There is the baby boomer generation, which had plenty of kids, but now that's fading out. The baby boomer generation is aging and they're not having kids any longer. There are a lot more kids taking care of their grandparents and their parents, and not as many white families having children. And the ones that aren't having as many children. They might have 1 or 2 kids as opposed to 3, 4, 5, 6. There's the aspect of religion being on the decline, and religions tend to have more children. They tend to promote more children and fight against the use of contraception, which is changing as people are growing up as humans. There are fertility rates issues. It's a serious problem that isn't being addressed very much. So, it's harder for women to get pregnant these days. It may be that it's not the woman's fault, but the man's. Perhaps nature is sterilizing men. I don't know. But that's for another discussion. And then there are life choices, maybe perhaps we consume things that may damage our DNA, damage our sperm count, whatever it may be. All of that combined with the fact that there are less whites immigrating to this country than there ever were before. So, what does that mean? The one thing that I learned that I found fascinating was that every year since 2007, the children in the under 10 and under age group, whites are actually the minority when compared to all other what you might call minorities. In other words, whites are less than 49% or 49% or less in most of these areas, and they call it Generation Z+. Whatever. You can define a generation however you want. But the generation right now that is the age 10 and under group, they are 49.6% white, 26% Hispanic, 13% black, and 10% Asian or other. Now, this means that whites are actually still the majority when compared to any one specific minority. But when compared to the overall, there are less whites in the current, elementary school than there are. And any, other races or even mixed races. Now, for me, I find this to be just the way that the world works. The way that the future is going to go. But I can't change it. And I don't think that closing the border is going to help. But here's the interesting thing is I don't believe that opening the border is what anybody wants. And I mean completely to everyone. In other words, I can't find one person who wants to really close the border completely. Well, I could find a few, but most people want a reasonable entry method and system. But the thing is, a lot of people, I don't know anybody who really wants to open the border completely and just let people flood across. It's a different world. The world is changing and a lot of people are immigrating. But as I said before, I'm trying to be neutral on this and I have a point. In 15 different states, including New Mexico, Nevada, Texas, California, Hawaii, and even DC, there are even lower rates of, let's say the whites are even more of a minority, 35% or less. And in some areas, like LA, South LA, 20% whites in the schools. So what I'm saying here is giving you the facts and figures. The facts and figures that someone who is extremely opposed to immigration would use to say this is the problem, right? And I would ask, why is that a problem? There's a term that I heard. It was somebody from the past long ago. They used it. It was called ethnomasochism. And their term of ethnomasochism meant that you hate your own race. And that you basically are, violent and hateful against your own race. This idea of white guilt is what they would call it today. And a lot of folks are afraid of this loss of whiteness, as I would call it. They fear their whiteness is their identity. And they fear that if they lose their whiteness, they will lose their identity. Now, let me say, first off, I'm not here attacking those people. I'm here trying to understand them. So if you're one of them and you're getting ready to say, you don't get it, at least hear me out. Like I said, this is a large country with a lot of different interests. Comparing it to other countries, just like when people say, oh, look, we used this method over here, and oh, it worked over here, and this worked over here. It doesn't matter. We live in America, damn it. It's a completely different country than any other country. There's no way around it. You can't define America as communist or socialist or capitalist. It's a mixture, not just of people, but of ideas. So there's a world in change right now, and it's causing a lot of fear. Whether you believe in climate change or you just want to call it changing climate, it doesn't matter. Whether you believe it's warming or cooling, it doesn't matter. In the future, there's going to be a lot more immigration, and a lot more people are going to be suffering because of harsher environmental conditions, more desertification, a whole variety of different floods and storms and earthquakes that'll probably cause problems in the future, which it won't be a few thousand people immigrating, it'll be a few million people. Like I've said, the population's doubled since I was born. What do you do with that? Things are changing, and we have to change with it. So what does that mean, and where does that leave us as a nation? Do we open our borders and just say, oh well, everybody come in? Of course not. That would be death for our own country. It would be. Because the future is facing some very hard times, however we look at it. And being prepared, to me, I was a prepper for a while. I believe in being prepared and being self-sufficient. So, who's pushing against immigration the most? It's mostly people who are afraid. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying we probably have good reason to be afraid as humans, but it's very difficult for me as an empathetic person to understand that mentality to the extent where if you really close your eyes and picture a person who has suffered through gang violence and their family being threatened, and they take their wife and their children and they say, we're going to try to get to America, whatever it takes. And then we have Bob over here, you know, behind his computer saying, oh, these people are just hired by George Soros, or they're part of some grand conspiracy. It really kind of saddens me and downplays the human experience. It shows ignorance to me. Because those who have suffered the most tend to have the most to offer. They're the people who start groups, support groups, and treatment centers to help people that need help. They're the ones who push for legislation to change laws because they've been affected by the problems. And the people who haven't been affected, they can only go by what they have experienced. And many people in this middle white America, all they know is their jobs and their homes and their family. And when you lose your job to automation, to change, it's easy to want to point the finger. And if you can't point it at the government, you've got to point it at someone. And the Mexicans are the great scapegoat. Emotions are played by the media to get people to hate Mexicans. And blacks. But mostly I'm speaking about Latinos here. And when I say Latino, I mean Mexican. Or, you know, there are a lot of Mexicans here, but a lot more people are coming from Honduras and Brazil and a variety of other areas down there where you would think, you know, there is a lot of crime and there's a lot of corruption. And it's easy for us in America to say, well, you guys are just a bunch of corrupt rapists down there, as our president likes to say, in his own way. Murderers, rapists, thieves, keep them out of here. But that's neglecting the human condition, like I said. That's basically believing that the average human is only out to harm others, and that's complete nonsense. But we cannot downplay the fears of other people, and I'm not going to. I believe people have a legitimate concern, and so that's why I'm addressing this here. Their concern is that Mexicans or blacks or a variety of these, what they call minorities, are going to overtake their communities, and I'd like to say, well, it's a little late for that. Let's talk about what they contribute to the society, instead of this bullshit delusion that blacks and Mexicans only live on welfare. When conservatives were asked what they thought, how many people they thought were on welfare, a vast majority of them thought that 80% or more of blacks were the ones taking welfare. But that's not the statistic. It's white people, just as much. 43% of people on any welfare program, which is anything, or let's just start with the military, okay? A lot of people don't realize that 43% of military members, service members that are fighting for your country, are what we would call 43% of men, rather, and actually 56% of women are Hispanics or minorities of some sort. Over half of the women and close to half of the men. Now, compare that to the actual population. These are people that are out on the front lines fighting for this country. I mean, in fact, the females in the military are more diverse than they are in the civilian population, which tells you something. It tells you that these people are willing to sacrifice themselves for a cause. I've heard some Mexicans that are more American than any Americans I know. You know, they just want to stand behind something. It doesn't mean that you can't appreciate your homeland and where you come from and still love the country you're in. And I try to put myself in that situation and say, what if I was over there? If I moved somewhere else from my country, I'd still have pride. But I'd also have pride in the place I'm from if I liked it. And if you really love America, of course you're going to have American pride. But then we berate and beat them down and make them feel unprotected. So if it's not about the military, what about spending power? Hispanics put $322 billion into the economy in 2016. That's a third of $1 trillion. They put $215 billion into the taxes, into this country. And on top of that, $101.8 billion to Social Security. Now, a lot of these people can't claim Social Security. A lot of people are maybe even visiting, but a lot of these people still have to pay into our Social Security. So a lot of the elderly right now who are getting Social Security out of a fund that basically the government has completely depleted for their own uses, is being paid by a lot of minorities out there. And it's important for us to recognize these things, these contributions. But in Texas and California, 20%, $1 in $5 spent at your business. If you own a business and you make $50,000 last year, 10,000 of that came from Hispanics. That's a lot of money. So that's 20% of your revenue for your income for the year. It's a hefty amount of money. And I'm using these figures as a direct rebuttal to the figures people use about how the whites are in decline. The idea that Hispanics are just out for their own and they're just sending all their money back to Mexico and America's going to be depleted. America's being depleted by the corporations, and any fool who doesn't understand that is an idiot and isn't doing the proper research. If you don't get it, then understand it. The corporations lobbying, the way that Congress approves any old bullshit patent if you got enough dollars in your pocket, or any lawsuit, in the court system where somebody can pass enough money over. But what about welfare? I guess that's the last issue we should talk about. What about Mexicans and welfare? When people were asked, they believed that they actually used the most of our welfare system, more money than whites at all. Medicaid, let's take for example, Medicaid, which is used to help people who need help with health care. They're 43% white, only 18% black, and 30% Hispanic. Now, I'm not denying that 30% is a significant amount, but when you look at how many immigrants we have in this country and how many Hispanics who live here legally already, let's just back up. Look at the Louisiana Purchase. Do you know what that is? That's when we bought the center of America, the United States. And to the west coast was the Spanish territory. And how fast we forget that it wasn't just Mexicans in Southern California invading. They once lived in this whole region. And I'm not saying that's justification, but in a way, if you want to really give any reparations whatsoever to what we've done in the past, through illegitimate means, wars, the way of the past of acquiring land. I mean, who really deserved to take somebody else's land? And you could go back and forth on this issue, but welfare is any program that helps the poor. And the sad fact is that all the people in Trump country, in middle America they're the ones who need the money the most. And a majority of them are white, not black or Hispanic. And those are the very people who are talking about how other people are siphoning off the system. It's your neighbors. It's your family, your friends. There's nothing wrong with needing help. And if you've ever needed help, you understand that. But if you're the kind of person who has worked happily at your job, never had any problems, never lost your career, never had to really suffer, you might think, well, everybody needs to take care of themselves. But let me tell you something. The minute you have an accident at work and you go blind, and your company denies your compensation claim, and you can't work anymore, and you realize how fucking corrupt the system really is, you might have a different tone. And that's what I want people to take away from this. If you were in a different situation than you're in, you might have a different outlook on the way the world operates and how you treat immigrants. I think most people are generally respectful of those, but I've heard enough people talk, tell Mexicans to speak English and say, oh, they shouldn't be teaching Mexican in our schools. Well, the fact is that it's a changing climate. English is the dominant language here, but it doesn't mean that we have to be afraid of other cultures, because it is a changing climate. And this is coming from a guy who's lived more or less, I've lived in Portland, Oregon all my life, the area, and, there aren't a lot of blacks here. We have a few Mexicans, but, I don't have to deal with that climate of being right on the border. And so I'm trying to empathize and understand how people think that are from those regions, to better understand each other. One thing I'd like to say is that our government is a whole spider of separate legs doing their own thing. I don't even say a spider. It's a labyrinth. And every different segment wants to keep the people distracted with something else, fighting a different enemy. If you look at how much Hispanics contribute to the economy and to Social Security and to the taxes, and you compare that with how much money they take out of the system, and then how much they contribute to the economy through their own businesses, and then really look at the statistics on how many Mexicans commit crimes compared to any other population, you'll see that it is what it is. You can't change it. Mexicans are part of this culture, and however we want to look at it, you may be angry by me saying that, so be it, but the Mexicans that have moved here, that have become citizens, that are Americans now, are not moving back. And Hondurans, I'm sorry, I should say Hispanics, but, I'm not a PC guy, I don't believe in that shit. You know what I'm saying. I really care about people. And when I hear about the stories of people, I become kind of jaded, and it's almost like I care so much about people sometimes that I wish I didn't. I wish I didn't have these feelings that we're all so screwed over by large corporations, by people who want to make money, by misunderstandings, by media conglomerates that want to lie out their ass, like Fox News. I mean, it's just a fool's news. But am I going to support CNN? Hell no. They're garbage news too. So is MSNBC. It's the same thing with somebody who left a comment on one of my videos the other day, like telling me that my Hillary Clinton, this and that. And I was like, dude, I didn't vote for Hillary. I just said I don't like Trump. I hate Hillary too. They're all idiots. It doesn't make a difference. And guess what? I can even look back. I voted for Obama twice, and he made a bunch of mistakes. He was an asshole too. They're all assholes. What do you do about that? You realize that the government's not the solution. They're part of the problem. But you also realize it's not your neighbor that's the problem. It's not the Mexicans in your community that are causing all the problems. Or the blacks. Definitely not the Asians. But I guess it depends on your outlook. So I should probably leave this with like one paragraph to at least define my position. I just want to see people understand each other. I want to see people coming together and really trying to understand where each other's coming from. Because me, coming from a hardcore kind of, I guess I would have been a liberal, in the past. I have come from a liberal background, and I believe in fighting against bullshit, corruption. I really don't like most of the conservatives I've met, but I'm making the effort to understand the other side. So I would hope that you, if you say you're a conservative or you're someone on the extreme right, even an alt-right, whatever it might be, will leave a response here and try to give me your perspective. on why immigration is such a big problem and why it's not worth it, and how our country can actually survive without the immigrants that have come here, because it's a different world. And once we realize that it's all integral, it's all wrapped together. I mean, there are people who believe that Muslims are trying to bring Sharia law to the U.S. Maybe a few are, but do you really think that's ever going to happen? It's the same type of propaganda, you know, but thinking that we're going to turn U.S. into Mexico. But we want to support our team. And our team should be our country, right? If anything. Not our color. So I don't see why immigrants who come here legally are a big issue for people. But I do understand that the border needs to be controlled. And at a time like now in history, we might need to relook the way we do things. I don't support Trump's wall. I don't think it's going to do any good. It's not that I don't support protecting the border. And this is, I hope I'm speaking for a lot of people who think the same way. It's not an issue of protecting the border. It's a matter of saying, okay, walls are very expensive and cumbersome and people can find a way around them. What's a better way? We live in a digital age of electronic monitoring. We have no use for something so cumbersome like that. And the people who live there are even saying that it would damage the landscape and they don't want it. So what do? It becomes a political issue of Trump said that he wants to build a wall, he's going to protect our country, therefore he wants to do it. Not for the sake of helping us as people. And I'm sorry to bring Trump into it and the whole wall thing, but it's a major important part of the immigration issue. The wall is not going to stop immigration. A lot of illegal immigrants who come here, they come here on visas and overstay. And they can find ways under and over walls. Let me just tell you this. If you and your family grew up in an area where you were in constant poverty, suffering, you didn't have enough food, there was gang warfare in your neighborhood, and you were getting death threats, and you decided to leave and try to make it to another country that was free, or at least you thought was free, and you made it to the border, and you saw a wall in front of you, would you turn back and cower out? Oh, fuck no. You could sit there for months working on a tunnel to get under that wall. You would get a hang glider, a hot air balloon, a small plane, whatever you had to do. The thing is, that people have time and they are dedicated. So how do we solve the problem? It's not by just pushing them away. It's by trying to help our neighbors. It's by improving the life of people in Mexico as well. And guess what? We've been doing that. Mexico has actually improved a lot. Immigration comes and goes and it wanes, and it's an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. But if Mexicans were really coming here and just sucking out the system and not doing anything for us, you know, didn't care about America, didn't join the military, didn't start businesses, then I would say, hey, maybe it's a problem. But look at the numbers, look at the facts. How much money are they really putting into this? So, they're people. Most of the Mexicans I've met in my life are pretty respectable people. They're hard workers. They care about their family. They care about their friends. They have culture. They care about God and their religion. I mean, what else can you ask from a human being? They may have a different color skin, but they're good people. So, that's my opinion on immigration. Hope it comes across properly. Don't get in a fight with the rake. And be kind to one another. Because we're in for a rough ride, people. The future's going to get grim. I hate to say it. But unless people start caring about one another, we're going to be in for some really hard times. Be well. Talk to you soon.